Hey everybody, it's Michael Podrum with FMZ here with Tyler Martin. We're going to discuss some topics I think are really meaningful today, specifically around a vision and how to really stay grounded in purpose, and some prompts that I think we can use on a day-to-day basis to make sure that we are really aligned with where we want to go and that we're actually looking into the future so that we create the life and the path that we want instead of getting lost in the transactional day to day, because that's where I feel we can get burned out. So I'm curious to see, Tyler, what it is that you're able to give for clarity, and what are some tips and tools for that?
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. And I think before we move into pragmatic tips and tools, one thing that you just even said that resonated with me in terms of how we get stuck in the transactional. I'd like to talk a little bit about maybe putting some finer notes on what do we mean by that, and I think that will point us in a couple of to the right tools that we would need to say these are going to help us get more clarity and be less transactional. And I think this week I spent some time with my wife Tiffany. We went and had breakfast in an environment where we could be safely distanced. And as part of that, one of the things that popped up for me that has routinely been popping up probably over the last 5 years with my work in the healthcare space is the nature of burnout. And I think in the nature of burnout, like what you just said, a lot of burnout is being ascribed to this transactional behavior that we have, which is we show up and we do our job. And if we feel burnout, it's because we don't have the right mindfulness tools, or we don't have the right self-awareness tools to recognize when we're being extended beyond where we ought to be. I was exposed to a principle called moral injury in work with doctors and nurses that I think actually is a better description of what's going on. This transactional behavior that I feel is showing up, that I think most people feel. At least they feel that it's going on, that they're either soul is being crushed in the job that they're doing, or they're running a business or trying to get a business run, and they're being pushed in a direction that they don't it doesn't resonate with them. It's not authentic to who they are. And what I think that's not an aspect of burnout based on I have to wear many hats. We all as entrepreneurs have to wear many hats. But what we're also seeing, I think, which is more, I don't want to say insidious, but more sinister, is that we're recognizing that the things we got into business for, the reasons we started our own business are slowly being compromised away. And the things that we truly want, the things that speak to our soul or our values, are being negotiated away by a system that does not value those same things. We live in a system that has spent centuries, that has spent, it has been even more on fire the last several decades, that encourages keeping prices low, that encourages moving towards a mean and based on an aggregate, doing things at volume, at scale, that is rewarding behaviors that oftentimes squelch some of the very reasons we became entrepreneurs or started our own business or got into career fields. And what we see is that whenever we have to trade for pursuing something that we need, whether that's even putting food on the table, and the cost is a piece of us, a piece of our virtue, a piece of who we are, gets costed away. That's where moral injury occurs, because we're now in a position for negotiating against putting food on the table versus doing the right thing. An example of this for me is, nurses that, I worked in a pediatric institution, and nurses were routinely asked to make the decision between going home and spending time with their family, or staying at home, staying at the job and being with a cancer patient, pediatric cancer patient on the ward whose parents did not come to see them that day. Now, there's a whole bunch of tragedy we can unpack in that. But imagine being someone who got into pediatric care because you care deeply about kids at the same time that you care about your own kids, going home and seeing them. And you're now put in a position of having to choose between the two of those. And I think that's where people are feeling that same kind of choice, a form of Sophie's choice of having to choose between, the things that really make my soul authentic and vulnerable and why I'm doing this versus something that is equally important. And that's where I think what I see with entrepreneurs is they come into a new opportunity. They come into a new business with the idea, a very firm idea of what they want to do,
Mm.
of what they want the future to look like. And they neglect to see all of the opportunities for that to be negotiated away over time.
Mhm.
And that's where I think some of these tools can become very powerful in not only helping you align to that on a day-to-day basis, but also putting you in a position of making the pragmatic decisions for what do I really want?
Mhm.
I'll pause there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that definitely does. It even reminds me as an entrepreneur, just in the startup phase, of not getting overwhelmed by the bigness of all the things, how to really stay grounded and focus on the core things, and then negotiate from there. Because I think then you're at least in a position to actually know what you're negotiating with versus just doing what you feel is letting the business dictate to you what it wants to do. So.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what tools or even prompts, somebody could ask themselves.
Yeah. I think what you just outlined has a couple of really good pieces that's going to push us to this tool, which is an inventory of what does the future look like. And I think oftentimes when you're an entrepreneur and I'll ask clients first, talk to me about what 5 years from now looks like. What does success look like? And when you're an entrepreneur, it's oftentimes easy to define things based on the business metrics. What's the top line going to look like? What does my margin need to look like? I will work with clients first to say, okay, outline those things. Now let's pull back a layer, right? And so we've got the first prompt is let's paint a picture of what that looks like, not just from the metrics of the business, but also from a personal perspective. What does your personal life look like as well? And oftentimes, people come into entrepreneurial ventures because they want to control their schedule more. They want the ability to travel. They don't want to be slave to a desk. They don't want to be slave to the minutia that they may have been escaping from the corporate world as well. I mean, a number of people will oftentimes define what the future looks like based on the things that are absent, the things that they are escaping, which is great. And so I will once we get that outlined, I'll keep poking and prodding. And I think this is the tool that people can do for themselves. I think the benefit for having somebody who is not as close to your own life is to be able to poke and prod in ways you maybe aren't able to, but you can do this for yourself, which is to say, okay, if the future looks like I'm able to travel, what does the culture look like within the venture that I'm building that allows me to do that? To allows me to unplug when I travel. A number of entrepreneurs struggle with the ability to actually unplug because they don't trust that the business is being run, back home in the way that they would run it. If when I talk to people about that and they experience that, my next question is that what's keeping you from being able to trust that? Now, you could have two answers to that. One is, and they're not mutually exclusive, they could be going at the same time. One is you don't have the infrastructure in place to be able to truly believe that this thing is operating in a way that it's taking care of itself, that it's being nurtured, that it's being fed. And then the other one is you have control issues and you struggle with, relinquishing some of that control. And we tend to oftentimes in the consulting world, in the coaching world, focus on the first one, which is let's get the systems in place. Let's get things in place that feed themselves so that you have confidence. Um, in my career as being a strategist for lots of companies, uh, that is the easy stuff because building systems is practical. It feels like you're doing something. But then when you go to actually implement that, this demon side over here of not being able to give up control is a very effective means of undermining the systems that are in place. It's one of the big reasons why consultants and consulting is such a rotational industry where lots of large companies hire consultants to come in with a big plan. And the big plan is the right plan, but it neglects to point to the cultural things. And I think that's a big piece of what I ask people is instead of just defining the systems, defining what success looks like based on these outward based measurements and metrics, top line, is to actually say internally, what's your internal culture look like? What do you expect to feel in 5 years? This is important because it is very easy to become married to an idea of what the future Shangri-La looks like and ignore the actual work that's going to be required in order to get there. And that's where having this tool of taking inventory of what the future, standing in the future, and defining that based on what the business success and performance is going to look like, also based on internally what things are going to look like and what you expect to feel, is such a powerful tool. And the more time I think people spend with this, sit with it, which is very difficult for many people to do because it's going to bring to the forefront some things you may not like about your management style or your working style. And what I will encourage people to do is suspend judgment. They are what they are. The things that come up during this, the things you expect to feel, you might be very quick to say, oh, well, that sounds selfish. That sounds less virtuous than I would like to be. And I ask people, do not jump to that position of judgment. Those things you carry with you, and you do not have control oftentimes. You mentioned, Michael, that that people want to believe things about themselves, that they view themselves a certain way. This should be a humbling exercise. This should be an exercise that actually says, in order for me to actually confront what it is my expectations of the future are, I need to actually look in a mirror that's not distorted, that's not some piece of metal that's just highly polished and giving you lots of different views of yourself that you want to see. This is a highly polished actual mirror that's showing you, this is what I'm carrying with me. And I can't expect to shame or guilt those things away as I go through as an entrepreneur. I actually need to embrace that these things are likely coming along with me. And I either need to learn how to collaborate with them, or this is going to be, I'm going to be in the grip 100% of the time, fighting to try to get to this view of success, and potentially fighting against myself. Long-winded, yes, but I'd say that's tool one that I think really starts to spin up this effort to be honest about how do you actually define success? Before we get to the next question, which is going to be, are you actually willing now within our existing system to do the things to deliver that? And I think that's where the moral injury starts to come in.
Well, what I like about that first part is, as somebody, I'm actually going through a detox, a month-long detox right now. There's, some similarities of, I know that there's going to be a very uncomfortable part to this, but I don't know exactly how I'm going to feel at the end. I know what I want to feel at the end, and I'm willing to go through the discomfort in order to achieve what I actually want to achieve. Because once I'm in that higher optimal state where my body's running clean, everything's functioning, that in turn, that's just like I think some of the scaffolding and the structure parts that so many entrepreneurs battle with, because they just want to kind of get to that next state, and that discomfort, that detox is sometimes where you have to actually put the work in to make the structure so that you actually then can feel the way that you are forecasting that you want to be in that, in that vision role. So it's really beautiful, I think, to lessen, like you were inviting us to not get so harsh and to get down on ourselves because we're not making these things happen. It's a growth edge, and to actually look at that as the exciting part that comes along with the role of entrepreneur, rather than I don't want that part, I want this part, but I don't want that part. And I think that's also what I'm hearing from you, is that you do need to get clear on, if you are going to be in the entrepreneurial role, it isn't a pick and choose
Mm.
scenario. It is, there's some things, but there's a lot of ways. I think the exciting thing of what I'm also feeling from what you said is that there's so many ways to actually ease the journey. And the journey is as in the wellness space, the journey is the whole point. So let's get curious. Let's not take it as, oh my gosh, this is all happening to me, but where I want to see what the next page says. Where am I going to be able to show up and surprise myself? Because I think quite often, once I see entrepreneurs really get into that initial groove, they find some other foundation. They actually increase their baseline, and once that baseline is, you stabilize that baseline, then you grow again, and then you grow again, and you kind of keep inching forward.
Hmm.
And to me, there's such a beauty in that, and almost an empowerment to it, and really looking at the 5 year 10 year track, not just the 3 months 6 months where we're like, oh, I didn't get the 1,000 followers or these other metrics that don't actually have the value of sustainability.
Yeah. When you talk about the the long term, midterm, near term thinking, for you, what have you experienced has sucked you into that just thinking on the day to day? What drives you there?
Sure. Well, it's actually going into just a place of uh, almost, it's not being present. It's actually like I just want to answer really quickly just from past experiences, and not really take the time to step back and say, okay, I know that I'm in this for the long haul. I know if I can think about this from a 2 year thing, where can we find some repeatable parts? Where can we see some patterns that actually, when we look at the pattern and refine that, um, it's, to me, that's where the magic happens, because then I know that I'm building something for multiple purposes rather than just one. So I really try to make sure anytime I'm working on anything, I actually say, what's going to be the next time I use this course, this PDF. I mean, we do things that we do every year, and in the third year of business with Find My Zen, now I'm like, wow, I'm really happy that we treated those as legacy items, not just, oh, I need to hammer something out.
Mm.
So that's been probably our biggest growth edge, and continues to be, just because also we are in a world where you have to be putting out a lot of content. But I think the more that you really get clear, as we get clear with our values and really what our purpose is, that's the litmus. So now I actually have a gut check, but also, not only is this going to be repeatable, can I use this in other ways, maybe is a better way to put that, but also, does this, in the first place, does this meet the metrics of giving me the things that I want? So you talk about travel or these other things, quite often people will then put themselves into an obligation that doesn't permit that so easily. So yeah, I think that's where it's just been a really interesting journey.
Yeah. You just mentioned people will put themselves into uh, an obligation, a commitment, a pair of handcuffs that automatically limits future choice, right? This is a conversation we have with our daughters who are 18 and 16, and they're considering going off to college. They're planning to go off to college. And one of the things we've coached them is that, look at the stats. We have 90% of professional working individuals who aren't working in the fields in which they studied. We have a number of people that are beholden to jobs that they need to take, not because they enjoy it or it feeds their soul, but because they have a student debt to pay down. And so we make these choices, oftentimes not understanding what those handcuffs are actually handcuffing us to. And I think what you just said is exactly what we want to do is not to say that you should not make a decision. Part of being an entrepreneur is confronting the decisions you are making and deciding whether they are net contributive to where you want to end up, in line with your values or not.
Hmm.
And sometimes that sounds very clear, right? It sounds like an equation where it's like, okay, all I have to do is step back here, and this is going to equal I'm in line with my values or not. I think we oftentimes simplify that by anchoring to a practice that is very good for many people, which is you go through the exercise of developing your mission statement, developing your vision statement, and all of you come up with your 5 or 6 values. And those can oftentimes be a smokescreen for your actual values. I see this in the corporate environment often, where we talk about, if you go and you did a poll of a lot of corporate values, pulled them off of their page, you're going to see a lot of open, honest communication as being there. But if you actually go and talk to people about whether that's a value that's upheld, the answer will be categorically no. And it will be situationally yes. Yes, in these circumstances, open, honest communication is allowed as long as it's packaged this way, as long as it's in these kinds of situations. And that's what people are really reflecting back to is the culture that you have to spend time immersed in order to understand, oh, actually, I'm rewarding these behaviors, not open and honest communication. It's really, there's other either tangential values, or there are values that are in conflict with those things that are actually being rewarded. And what we're saying here is that as entrepreneurs, you are not immune to this just because you might be a solo entrepreneur. You oftentimes, I am not a fan of the corporate environment. It is one that I believe is on the precipice, whether that precipice is right now or 5 years or 10 years from now. It is at a point where it is having to reconcile what is the net add of value that the corporate structure is actually giving to individuals, giving to our society, to our economy, and it is asking some very tough questions. I think through the last year, even before COVID, people were already asking the question, why am I dedicating 60% of my time to something that feels so soul crushing? And there has been a flight now through COVID. We've seen a massive acceleration in entrepreneurial efforts, and people are celebrating the fact they're escaping corporate culture. But let's be clear here that corporate culture reflects the rest of culture that we are operating in. And people are going into entrepreneurial thinking that they're escaping this. They're actually walking into something and they're creating things. And this is what I see with a lot of entrepreneurial ventures, is they get to a certain threshold where it is more than 5 people, it is more than 10 people. And it is starting to look a lot like the corporate environment that they were seeking to escape. And there are reasons for that. And you already named it, Michael, is that people are signing up for obligations so that they are not assessing the full weight of what is being asked of them.
Mhm.
And that requires asking very tough questions of, of who you are. And I think that I was in a meeting with a group of women entrepreneurs, and it was one of those sessions that you've described, which is with others, being able to take that step back and think about the long term. We got to one other entrepreneur, and with, I mean, just an incredibly brave person who said, I agree. I agree that we need to be thinking about where we're going. We need to be thinking about these strategic things. It's fun. But I just maxed out my fourth credit card today. I have to call back these 4 vendors. It starts going down the list, and painting the picture of the quagmire she finds herself presently in. And I think that oftentimes entrepreneurs come at 2 points, right? They come at a point where they are near suffocating, and they are running on fumes, and they're like, I don't know how to get out of this. And what I have to work with them on is, okay, there's actually things we can trace this to, decisions that were made previously that we could have avoided getting to this point. But we're not at that point, right? We don't get to hit pause and go back in time. We don't get to hit pause and say, let's just not worry about the bills that are coming due. Let's while we get this figured out, we have to do things in parallel, where we can say, okay, we've got to figure out how we can either teach you to tread water or to swim for shore, at the same time that we're making sure that we're not further digging a deeper hole. And in order to do that, we have to start thinking more long term. And with that is potentially going to come some very tough decisions that need to be made about the near term. That you may be pursuing a contract that you feel is going to give you that opportunity to think big, to be more strategic. And what you find is when you get that Walmart contract is now you are beholden to a very demanding, very strong, very powerful customer who is going to be more than happy to squeeze you on margin at every chance that they get. And you're like, well, how is it that I went from being so excited about winning this massive contract to hating it so much 6 months later?
Yeah.
And we can talk about that. I think the other aspect is you're not in the quagmire yet, but you're starting out, and you want to make sure that you avoid those things that are avoidable, while also not deluding yourself that there are going to be some mistakes that will be made.
Mhm.
That you're not gonna, you can't delude yourself into thinking that there aren't going to be some mistakes. There aren't going to be some smaller quagmires that you have to navigate. But at each point, we want to at least build in the tools to ask the question, is this a path that takes me closer to where I want to be or not? And am I willing to measure the trade-offs for what that's going to look like? On the one hand, I might get the security of having, for the next 6 months, a very big contract that I don't have to worry about keeping the lights on. I don't have to worry about paying my employees because it's covered. However, what is the cost? And that is where entrepreneurs tend to get stuck or get sideways.
Mm-hmm.
Is that they make those decisions and then they're shocked by the costs that come along with them, the obligations, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
Not everything is avoidable, but at the very least, as entrepreneurs, we should be walking into these decisions with our eyes as wide open as possible.
Yeah.
And part of that starts with reconciling that we are really good at self-deception as well.
Mhm.
We are built for when something promising shows up, really giving a lot of attribution bias towards its merits and downplaying its demerits. And that is something we just as entrepreneurs have to confront. We have to learn, we need to get better at confronting the fact that we have some things that are working against us to help delude ourselves into some things that at the end of the day, if we were standing in the future and we knew what the costs were, we may decide not to do them. Make sense?
Yeah, no, I think it's really meaningful. You spoke of this conversation that existed even pre-COVID within the corporate space, and in the wellness space, studios. Obviously, the whole studio model is probably going to change post-pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of entrepreneurs or teachers are realizing that they need to become more entrepreneurial. That they really uh, don't want to just rely on the studio to be their bread and butter. They need to start thinking for themselves. They need to develop things that might feel uncomfortable, but at the same time, once you really get clear, and I think the clarity is what I keep hearing from you, is if you take the time at the beginning to put the foundation, to put the thought into the values, the real drive, not just that you love the feeling and these more um, uh, etheric things. I think that it's when you really feel it in your gut and you can actually say yes, no, yes, no. You really get into a place where then you actually get to lean into, I think, more of these conversations and these questions that it can feel very overwhelming being a serial entrepreneur and working with lots of people that also don't have the business school background and the marketing background and these things. There has to be all these different hats, and I think it's important to both acknowledge that, but to also be a little bit more easeful with that, because that is the unique part about wellness, is that it is a passion business. It is a business that is inspirational. It is a business that people really deep down, they're there to help others. So when you can both align that with these questions, then it doesn't become about you and all the things that you have to do. And it really, I've just seen it just become such uh, uh, a Kickstarter, to borrow the name from that amazing business that really kind of crowdsources that energy. And that's also something that we need to recognize is who is our market, and instead of just this vague thing, who's going to help us kickstart. So really getting clear on that side too of who do we want to be really engaging with, because if you're lit up, that's the first place to start, and then go from there, then evaluate. And listening to you, I get into my own head about Find My Zen and where we're going, and then I recognize, but I know what my purpose is. My purpose is to be a support system, to be an advocate for these lighthouses, these people that are going out into the world and really doing something that I think is needed more than ever, and I think is more celebrated than ever. So it's the perfect time to actually cultivate that passion, the curiosity, and then let that be the first place. And then make sure that you're really looking at your priorities. And what I'm hearing from you is develop the behaviors to actually support the path that you actually really want. You just don't know. It seems just it gets muddled up of how you're actually going to get there. So yeah, all this is definitely landing.
Yeah. You brought up a couple of things that hit me. One, you brought up the nature of wearing multiple hats. And if we're talking about another tool, that's probably actually where I'd start with a lot of entrepreneurs is what, again, another inventory tool. And the reason why I'm a fan of inventory tools is because they act as that mirror I was talking about before. Is that oftentimes we don't pause enough to really just take a to trust that we are capable of thinking critically through who we are and what our expectations are and what we're bringing to the table and what's going on. There are more than enough vendors. There are more than enough consultants and executive coaches like myself who will come in and say, "Hey, we can do that work for you. Let's just book an hour's worth of time. I'll listen, and we'll be your career therapist." And we do that. But it's so much more powerful if people take the time to actually think critically around two things. One is just taking that inventory and saying, as an entrepreneur, what are the hats that I am going to have to wear?
Mm.
And people will say, I'm gonna have to do marketing, I'm gonna have to do sales, and they start labeling the things that they may have heard. I would even just say, let go of labels of functional expertise and disciplines. At its core, when you are an entrepreneur, you have something that you want to get into the hands of a customer, and you want them to compensate with you for the value that you're delivering to them. And that's what you're trying to do, whether that's a service or whether it's a product. Now, how you do those things is where we get all of these hats, these technical siloed hats that emerge from this. And the next piece after taking that inventory, I think resonates with some of the other things you were saying, is that some of those hats are going to be more appealing to wear than others. And you mentioned the thing that is going to hit with you, that's going to land with you, that's really going to resonate with you. And entrepreneurs, those are the things that tend to get nurtured the most. I have a number of photography clients who at their, they love to create. When it comes to creating, they have no problem with running sessions and creating or spending hours in the digital darkroom crafting an image. But they really dislike the marketing. They really dislike the sales, like many creatives, right? We talk about starving artists. It's not necessarily that art itself isn't appreciated. It's that artists like to create. They don't like to do a lot of the other things that go along with the art and actually building a market for it. And so I have to talk to them about, it's okay to say, I don't like doing this. I don't like doing this. And there are going to be more than enough vendors that are going to come alongside and tell you that, hey, those things you don't like, I can make those easier for you. And that's another example of, you sign up for a vendor that's going to, a CRM vendor who is going to help you manage your relationships with your customers. And you get into it, you find this is an entirely different career path that you have to learn how to actually build out the platform, how to make it fit into your system. And all of a sudden you're doing things that are taking away your personal joy, taking away your enthusiasm for the business. It feels like a job. And I think that what you mentioned is, it anchors back to, for you, it anchors back to being very clear on why you are here. What is your purpose? And I think that is a exercise that we should be doing as frequently as possible, because that's going to dictate to you. The business will dictate to you what your operating model needs to be based on the way you have positioned it. It's going to dictate to you your business model. But just because that's what's emerging is what's going to drive success, even if your vision is aligned, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to enjoy all of those things. Yeah. And so a lot of entrepreneurs get that point, is they're starting to see success with that operating model, but they're not liking certain things. And so they start saying like, well, where do I get help? And going back to what you said is let's first start with, what are your strengths? Whether you use a tool like a Strengths Finder, or whether you just go through that exercise of saying, this is when I feel like my heart is singing, when I'm sitting down and I'm talking to a client and I'm talking to them about what they're trying, about their dreams, about their vision, about the way they view themselves. This is something that my wife and I do in our photography business. Mm-hmm. And she gets tremendous value from that. It's all the other things that starts to drive anxiety. And so the question then is, okay, how do we then make sure that the operating model continually pushes you to being able to thrive from that position of strength.
Hmm.
And then bringing on support, whether that's partnership through vendors or whether that's new employees that are going to start wearing some of those hats that have to still be nurtured, that have to still be fed.
Hmm.
Because if they're not, you are at war with yourself. We are very good at procrastinating on those things that we just don't want to do.
Mhm.
And I think that's where what you said has so much power is that you don't need to convince yourself that you can be good at all of these things that do not resonate with you. You, as all of us as entrepreneurs know, there is a certain degree of competency we have to get to early on, because I can't go out and say, okay, I'm starting this business. And if I'm not well capitalized, I'm not able to go out and say, well, I'm going to hire an accountant over here. All of us have lived that needing to learn how to be an accountant
Mhm.
just so that we don't get audited, just so that the business doesn't eat itself, right? So, but all of us also know we are more than happy once we get to a certain point to offload that hat to someone who has that passion or who is good at that at the very least. And so I think what you said can be a very good North Star is pause and just see what is resonating, what is landing with you, and
Mhm.
where it sits. Whether that, pay attention to when somebody says, "Hey, I need to call this client back." Where's that feel in your body? Like if I'm talking about my wife, or talking about Tiffany, if I say, "Hey, Tiffany, we need to call back this client and talk to them about, the packaging and products," I can almost visually see her traps like tense, like immediately. It's like she's bracing for, because it's just, again, goes back to either she doesn't have the skills to do something that might actually be very rewarding, or it's actually just pointing to, this is not something that resonates with me.
Mhm.
And that's okay. We spend a lot of time telling, entrepreneurs spend a lot of time telling themselves, well, this is what I signed up for, I should like it. What, we don't have to like anything. The business will dictate maybe that it needs to be done, but it doesn't mean you have to shame yourself into liking something that you're not going to ever like. That's okay.
Yeah.
So I love what you said in terms of anchoring to those things that really resonate and set you on fire.
Well, and you set it up best, of course, and then unknowingly, that really is the point of where Find My Zen's directions going is, supplying the tools. So what we're discussing today is really to get clear about the roadmap. And I implore anybody who's watching or listening to this to, take assessment of both what it is you're looking to do, forecast, future cast that life, then reverse engineer it, kind of look at what is going to need to happen along that path to get there, but then also take assessment of what tools you have, take assessment of what mentors you have. We don't do enough asking for help in today's society. We think we just got to figure it out. And so, this conversation, we're going to be having conversations with several other, people that can support the wellness practitioners and facilitators on their journey to being a solopreneur or to being a brand or whatever it is, or just having a little bit more clarity of what their direction is anyway, because that can just be the seed for the future. And when we can really trust the scaffolding, that we can just continue to be adaptable. And in today's society, I think we recognize that today's flavor might not be what I want in a year or two. So how do we continue to iterate? Because that is also the beauty of today's world is collaborations becoming such a more profound key to business. And so when you're in your own scaffolding and you can trust that, then the collaborations will also be much more easeful. So we'll get into that in a different conversation. But today's just been really insightful, and I think we'll have some outlines of just some of the key points that we talked about. But thanks, Tyler. I really appreciate both the clarity and the heart that you have with these concepts and how you show up for your clients, your wife and family, and just for your community. So thank you, Tyler.
My pleasure, and looking forward to the next conversation, Michael.
Appreciate it.